Oh, oh, bro,
Right.
that's dope.
In 2024, trying to choose a webcam can be super difficult. There are tons of options out there, and OBSBOT went ahead and sent me their Tiny 2 Lite to go ahead and take a look at. We're gonna completely review this thing. We're gonna compare it to my mirrorless camera setup that I'm currently using right now. We're gonna compare it to one of the most popular webcams, especially since the pandemic. These things just skyrocketed in popularity and honestly in price a little bit as well. We're going to go ahead, I'm going to show you how to upgrade the firmware on here, which you should do before using. And we're going to just take a look at the software, see how everything works, and we'll finally have a conclusion once we get to the end. So without further ado, let's go ahead and at least get this thing unboxed. So we've got our little box here. Pretty simple and straightforward. We got the branding. We've got what's in the box. We got the camera, a cable, USB-C to A adapter, manual, warranty card. It has a little bit of information about the manufacturer, and that's all that's really on here. So let's go ahead and get this open. And we've got a download QR code for the software. And then we have informational QR code for the actual piece of the product. Then they kind of have a very brief thing about how you're able to do some of the gestures, which we'll go over in a second. Stay pro, stay productive. And we got the camera in here, and it is a very, very small camera. I have large hands, but that's a pretty small camera. It fits very, very well in my palm. It looks nice though. I kind of like it. It's got a matte black finish to it. We've got the USB-C, we've got the integrated stand in this one. So that's one of the big differences with its bigger brother, is that this one actually has a stand integrated like a lot of other webcams. Whereas the Tiny 2 does not have a stand integrated, it is a magnetic one. And let's see what else is in the box here. This is like a super high density foam. We'll just take this out like that. Nothing under the foam. And we've got a little bag. So, I mean, plastic is pretty minimal here, which is nice. There is still plastic, which is not great, but plastic is minimal, which is nice to see. And we've got that USB-C to USB-C cable. It seems like it is plenty long. So you can, oh yeah, this is probably about 5 feet, I would say, maybe 4 feet. It's got pretty good length on it, so that's great. It allows you to put the webcam where you need it to be. And then you got that USB-C to USB-A adapter. So next up, we'll get the camera plugged in and we will update the firmware. We're gonna go ahead and just do the auto upgrade for the firmware. So all you have to do is download the OBSBOT Center. You go ahead and get your webcam plugged into your computer, and it's actually telling me that there is an update for device 1. We're gonna go ahead and click on that. It's gonna tell me that there is a firmware upgrade available. It's gonna give us a few little bits of information, and we're just gonna say yes, and it is gonna go ahead and update that firmware for us, which is pretty great. I will leave a link in the description that will walk you through the firmware methods. If you want to do the manual method, that's entirely up to you. But it'll also walk through this auto upgrade as well. All right, with the firmware upgrade done, let's go ahead and see how the camera works. All right, so here is what the camera looks like directly out of the camera. I'm using the camera as a native source into OBS to capture this video. So it looks pretty good. We're gonna go ahead. I'm just going to take a look at the zooming again and see how that looks when we're going and zooming in with the native. So that's up to 1.27. That's up to 1.75, 1.96, 1.99. So, I mean, the zooming looks really, really crisp considering the lens size for this. Let's see when it gets into the point where it is starting to get really pixelated. I mean, that is full zoom and it looks really good, honestly. That is full 4x zoom. So if I zoom all the way back out, that looks great. I think it looks fantastic. It looks a lot better than it does directly out of the OBSBOT software. So directly out of camera, the camera works really, really well. The virtual camera seems to have a few more issues with quality. It tends to get a little bit more pixelated, especially when using the virtual camera with OBS, which is why I haven't used it for this whole video. And when you start zooming in past, I think about 2 times, the virtual camera starts to get even more pixelated. So keep that in mind when using things. I like using it native. It looks really, really good. Image wise, I've kept everything the same as I showed it before. I did change the compensation because next, after I check the microphone, I want to go ahead and test this against the other cameras that I have. So let's go ahead and test how the microphone sounds. All right, so this is what the microphone sounds like. I have the settings set to automatic gain control. I have the noise reduction set to medium because this had the best noise floor where it wasn't picking up any of my room noise. And the radio distance is set to close. Let's go ahead and put the radio distance to standard because I am a little bit further away, and it does boost up the volume quite a bit. If I put it to close, it seems to have it a little bit lower. I'm going to show you how the noise reduction works. So this is on medium, as I mentioned. If I go ahead and change it to weak, it is picking up some of my fan noise. I can see it in the sound meters in OBS, and then if I have it to off, it's obviously going to be a lot more. Medium is really good because when I'm completely silent, there is no sound being picked up at all. So that works really, really well. And I will see what this sounds like while I'm editing the video. So I can't really tell what it sounds like right now, but when I go ahead and do the wrap up, I'll talk about what it sounds like after checking the video out. So editing Dimitri here, and the microphone isn't great, but it's not bad. And to be fair, my room isn't doing it any favors. The webcam is very close to a wall, so it's getting a lot of reflection and refraction off of that wall of my voice. The room's also really small, so it's very echoey. And honestly, I think if you spent a little bit of time to EQ it, it could sound quite a bit better. If you had a little bit more sound dampening in your room, it would sound even better than that. And if you're using something like OBS, you could just use like VST plugins and play around with that and try to make it a little bit better. But if you're using this for like work calls or just family Zoom calls and stuff like that, I don't think anybody's going to overly complain. I think this sounds better than standard laptop microphones, and the noise cancellation is very good. So I am very happy about that. Overall, I'm going to give it a thumbs up. Pretty decent for a laptop microphone. It's obviously really not going to compare to my very expensive XLR microphone plugged into a very expensive XLR interface that has a ton of software designed around making my microphone sound as good as possible. But overall, I think the OBSBOT's doing pretty decent here. And here's a comparison of the 3 cameras. Feel free to try to guess which one is which. It may be easy, it may not be. But we have the 3 cameras. So we have my A6400 with the Sigma 16mm f1.4 lens. We have the OBSBOT, and then we have the C922. Now the C922 is going to have the biggest disadvantage because I'm shooting everything at 60 frames per second, and the C922 maxes out at 720p at 60 frames per second. If I dropped everything down to 30 frames, then it would go ahead and be able to go up to 1080p. But I like shooting everything at 60 frames, so I want to compare these all at 60 frames. So this is with all of my lights on. Things look pretty good. I'm looking over here. I can tell which one's which. Obviously, I did set it up, but you can kind of tell the crispiness. You can kind of look at how sweaty I am and oily I'm getting from working on this video. You can see which one has the most amount of detail. Honestly, all 3 of them look pretty decent. Obviously, the C922 looks the worst out of these 3. But the cameras all look really, really good. And again, this is with all of my lighting on. So let's go ahead and turn that lighting off and see how they all perform then. All right, so this is the same configuration with all of the lights off. I have my mirrorless camera set to an auto ISO instead of 100 ISO. And the OBSBOT, I left it the exact same. And as you can tell, in the lower light situations, it starts to blow out a little bit and get a little bit overshot, which is why, as I mentioned, when I'm gaming, I don't have all of my lights on So I turn that compensation for the exposure down, and I'm going to do that again now, and you're going to see the difference. So right now it currently went up to 1.3. I'm going to go ahead and bring that down to, yeah, 0.7 looks pretty good. And now there's not as much of the blowing out of the light that's coming in from my window onto my face. On the default at the where it was up at 1.3, which is what we had it before, it's really, really bright. If we put it to 0, it's still blowing out a little bit. So dropping that compensation down a little bit really makes a big difference and keeps the clarity of the image too. So I think that looks pretty good. But honestly, the cameras are looking great. The OBSBOT looks fantastic in low light. It obviously does benefit from having better lighting, as all cameras do. It makes a big difference. But it doesn't look bad in low lighting. And while I'm streaming, as I mentioned, I have no lights on. It's usually nighttime, so there's no light coming in from the window either. And I just have a bright screen beside me, as well as in front of me and as well as beside me. So we can go ahead and take a look at how that looks. I recorded some when I was streaming a little bit earlier this week. Just didn't hold any points.
That's great.
Wow. All right, look at that timing too.
Perfect.
Perfecto. All right, buddy. I'll talk to you later.
Yes, sir. Good night.
Good night, man. All right, so we've got it plugged in. I switched it over to my other computer just to make it a little bit easier to walk through the software. Right now, the device is sleeping. If we go ahead and resume it or wake it back up, here we are. We got our visual preview here, which is really nice. And the software is super easy to use. So we have all of the different tracking modes. So standard is no tracking. Motion is tracking any motion, whether it's a person or not. Normal tracking is going to be tracking an individual person. Upper body is going to track your upper body. And then close up is going to zoom in the camera to track you as well as possible. So if I turn on the normal tracking, this is the mode that most people would use. If I go ahead and move over to the left and then I move over to the right, it's going to follow me around. And if I go ahead and move back and stand up, it's going to track me, but it's going to keep as much of the frame in there as possible. If I go ahead and do close up and I go further back, it's going to zoom in on me, and it's going to continue to zoom in on me and zoom out depending on how close I am. Whereas under normal tracking, if I go ahead and move backwards, it's not going to zoom. It's just going to try to keep my face in the center of the frame. And then upper body is just going to keep my upper body in the frame and not do anything below that, but it's not going to zoom in as tightly on my face. So those are all pretty cool. Now the group AI mode here is going to try its best to track multiple people in a frame at once. If you have it on standard, it's going to try to lock onto one person, and if somebody else moves out of frame, it's not going to follow that. So I don't have any friends, unfortunately, to test the group mode on, but it's nice that it's there. For presets, you have 3 presets that you can load on here, and I've already got 2 set up. So I have one set up for when I'm gaming, for when I'm streaming. I've actually used this streaming already, and I will show some clips from that as well. But here it is where I have a preset where it turns off the tracking, it locks it into a specific position, and it changes some of the settings. So if we go ahead and look at my settings here, we can see that the tracking is off. I have my autofocus set to my face, I have the auto exposure, the white balance, and I have the compensation set to -1 because I use my camera when I'm streaming with no lights on, but my screen is really, really bright. It seems to blow out a little bit of that light when I'm doing that, so I changed the compensation. So as you can see here, this is what the light looks at 0 compensation. We'll go over the image settings in a second. And then I have the tracking mode, which just turns on tracking and allows me to follow without having to use the hand signals. Now, as you can also see here, we have a gimbal control that we can actually use to control the camera. So we can aim it up, we can aim it down, and this is what I used to position the camera where I wanted it, and then saved that as the settings. So I updated the PTZ, and that saved the positional setting for the gaming preset, for example. And you can do a whole bunch of things. You can set up some fun presets where it's like looking at the ceiling, looking at a window, looking at a shelf or something like that. You can get pretty unique with that. You can set it to coarse or to fine control. So if you set it to the fine control, it's going to move a lot slower. Whereas you move it to the coarse, it moves quite a bit quicker. So the coarse is good if you want to do big, large movement. And if you want to get a little bit more refined, you go ahead and use the fine. And the slider here is for the zoom. So you can go ahead and dictate how much the zoom is going to go. It starts to get really pixelated because it's all digital zoom. So keep that one in mind. We're going to go ahead and zoom all the way back out. And then we have our wide, medium, and narrow. So by default, the one-time zoom is wide. The medium is going to bring it up to, I think, 1.15. Yeah, 1.15% zoom. So this is still good. I don't believe there's much digital zoom here, so you don't see the pixelation. And then narrow is when we start to get into a little bit closer. Still looks pretty clear and pretty crisp. Again, we'll test these with the direct output of the camera on my other computer once we switch over. But it's pretty cool that you have these right available to you. So if you like having a really close camera, you set it up on narrow. If you like having it a little bit farther back, you do medium. And if you like having it wide, then you set it up to wide. And then on the side here, we just have the ability to, again, change how quickly things move, which is kind of nice. Now, as I mentioned, the image settings, we can change quite a few things here, and we can set these to the presets as I showed you. So you can turn on and off the autofocus. You can turn on and off HDR. HDR only works, I believe, for 4K 30. It does not work for the 1080p 60. I believe it also works for the 1080p 30. So here you go. It only supports resolutions of 4K, 1080p, and 720 with a maximum frame rate of 30 frames per second. I like having my webcam and my camera set at 60 frames per second. So I don't have the HDR on, but if you like the 30 frames or 24 frames kind of style, then you can have your HDR on. The autofocus, you could set it to a global autofocus. So if you're showcasing a lot of items and you don't have your face in it very much, the global autofocus is going to be better. If it's going to be looking at your face, then the face autofocus is better. The exposure, same kind of idea, and then you can set a compensation. So as I mentioned, right now it is a little bit brighter than I would like. So if I wanted to, I can go ahead and kind of adjust how bright the camera is exposing for with this compensation, so that it'll still auto change the exposure, but it'll do it a little bit lower than what is considered ideal by the camera. So keep that in mind. So that's pretty cool. If you have lights in the background that are flickering when the webcam is on, you can use the anti-flicker to try to balance that out. So that's nice. Also like CRT TVs and stuff like that, although I believe they're going to be much higher than a 60 hertz. So I don't know if that's going to work out too well. The white balance is very similar. And then we have the ability to adjust the contrast, saturation, sharpness, and hue. Now I adjusted the contrast up to 66 from 50, just because I like the way that color looks a little bit better. It looks a little bit more even. And I was trying to get this color to look similar to my other cameras for when we go ahead and do the comparison. Now under more, we have a few other things. So we can set the device's initial state. So we can set the initial position alongside with all those settings that we just went through. So this is really cool because you can set it so that whenever the camera turns on, if you want to, whenever it turns on, it's looking straight at the ceiling. So that in case the camera accidentally turns on when you don't want it to, it's not looking directly at you. You can also set one of your presets to be the initial state so that whenever the camera turns on, it's going to go ahead and use the preset that you have as its initial state. So that's pretty cool as well. It's nice being able to have those options and be able to set that. For the device sleep, you can set it so that it auto sleeps. So if it's being unused by any applications for a certain period of time, it will put itself to sleep. I have that one off right now because I like using a button, which I will show you in a second. And then you can also set a sleep background. So as I showed before, when it's to sleep, it's normally just a black background. If I go ahead and resume that, I can go ahead and select one. So this is their default selected one. And that is just an OBSBOT come back soon. But I also did a custom one. So if I put that to sleep, if the video is being used anywhere, like if the camera feed is being used anywhere, this is what's going to show instead of the camera feed because the camera is currently pointed downwards. So that's pretty cool as well. And then the gesture control. So the gestures are cool. If I go ahead and put my hand up, it will go ahead and change tracking modes. So now it is tracking me. It'll follow me around. And this is the standard tracking mode. If I go ahead and put my hand back up, it is going to turn the tracking off. So it's going to flip in between those two modes. You can also do zooming with gestures. So if I go ahead and put my hands beside my face and then I zoom in, I can zoom in. And then if I go back outwards, I can zoom outwards. It also has a locked zoom in, zoom out. So it's not a range. So if I go ahead and put my hand beside my face, it's going to zoom into a particular amount. If I go ahead and do it again, it's going to zoom out, and you can set that zoom factor here. So if you want to zoom in really quickly and show off your pores, you're more than welcome to do that. And you can also have do a direction flip where with the zooming, instead of the zooming in and out, you're kind of just switching which direction those gestures are working. So that's pretty cool. For the audio, you can set your microphone status to be on or off when the camera is asleep. So if you're using the OBSBOT microphone all the time, whether or not you're using the camera, you would want this to be on because it'll allow you to use the microphones on the camera when the camera is off. However, I'm not using the microphones at all, so I'd prefer the microphone on the camera being off when the camera's off. You can also set some noise reduction. By default, it's at off. And medium seem to be the best for my room, and we'll go over that afterwards also in a second once I have that plugged into the other computer. Automatic gain control will just change the gain on the microphones to try to get you at the most nominal level for the microphone, so that's cool. You can also completely disable the microphone outright if you never plan on using it, and then you can also set whether you're close, standard, or far from said microphones. You can set up the mirror image so that it'll always mirror what your image looks like. That's entirely a personal option. You're also able to change whether the view and gimbal are reversed. So when you're changing the gimbal controls, you can change whether or not those are reversed or not. Again, very similar to the whole hand gesture situation. The indicator status light on the Tiny 2 Lite is a little bit different than the Tiny 2 because it's just a little icon light right beside the lens versus the bar that's on the base. So you can determine whether that's on or off. The nice thing about it is that it's color coordinated depending on what kind of mode it's on. So I like having it on, and you can also set its brightness from 3 all the way down to 1, which is really, really dim. It doesn't bother me at all. It's a very small light, so having its brightness doesn't really matter too much. Now up top here, we have a few other options. We have the ability to record directly within the software, which is nice. And once we go into the settings, I'll show you where the recording quality settings come in. We also have the ability to turn on a virtual camera. Now what that'll do is it will have the OBSBOT Center actually sending out a virtual camera to the rest of your computer so that you can use a whole bunch of stuff within OBSBOT Center, and I'll go over that in a second, and kind of manipulate the image a little bit before it actually gets sent out to other programs like Discord and stuff like that. It is not going to be using the native stream directly out of the camera, and those things that are being manipulated are using the beauty tab, which also has things like a bokeh where you can set on an artificial bokeh behind you, using the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 20 series or newer. You can also do retouching. This will go ahead and do a whole bunch of things. It'll smooth out your skin. You can put your lip tones. You can do a whole bunch of really crazy stuff. So that's fun and also a little bit crazy. You're more than welcome to check this out if you ever get the product. I am currently not using the virtual camera, but yeah, those options are all there. And then you can also set up filters where you can have black and white and nature and all those kinds of things. Now, finally going through some of the settings here, as we can see, we have the resolution that I've currently set. This is for the recording and the virtual camera default resolution. So 1080p 60 is what I have it at. You also have the ability for 4K 30, 1080p 30, 720p 60, and 720p 30. You can also change where you want the preview mode, whether it's landscape or portrait. I have the camera currently in landscape. If you want to do it in portrait, you actually have to mount it sideways. So you have to use a tripod of some kind or a mount of some kind to change the camera orientation, but you can change the way that the preview works. And then for the recording, you can set the bitrate and the format and its location that it's going to save to. For device management, if you have multiple cameras set up, you can have them all set up as different numbers. You're able to upgrade the firmware and stuff from here as well, and then you can move the camera from different positions so that when you're on the main page, you can go ahead and choose your camera number and kind of have everything set up the way you want it to. The OSC is something that I'm not using, so I'm not gonna be able to give you too much information here, but all of the settings relating to OSC are here. And then you have general settings, you know, whether you use global hotkeys, if you have the remote control, which is this button here on the application. If you have the remote control, you can turn it on and access it using that. Whether or not the software starts when the computer starts, whether when you close it, it actually fully closes or just goes to the tray, all that kind of stuff. One last thing I wanted to show you before I switch back over to the streaming PC is the OBSBOT plugins for the Stream Deck. I've been using this quite a bit lately. I like it a lot. You can go ahead and get it right from the Elgato Marketplace. And then once you do, you'll have these 3 options here that you can go ahead and set. So set is going to set a setting to a particular value and that value only. So whenever you toggle it, it is going to automatically set it to whatever you have that set to. Adjust is going to adjust the value up or down. And then reset is going to reset a value back to its default. So for example, for set webcam, if I go ahead and I'm going to do this one as sleep, it's going to have the camera here, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do device sleep and resume. So now, whenever I go ahead and click this button on my Steam Deck, it is going to go ahead and sleep the camera, and then it's going to wake the camera back up. So I've been using that one an absolute ton. Another one that you might use set for is maybe to do a particular zoom. So you want the zoom and you want it to be like max zoom all the way in. And then you would have to have another one for the zoom. And then you'd have to have that one for all the way out. So now if I press the all the way out, it's going to zoom it all the way out. And if I press the one that goes all the way in, it's going to zoom it all the way in. So you can set all these things up directly on the Steam Deck. Now the difference for the adjust is if I go ahead and replace that one, let's go ahead and put our reset in here, and let's do reset zoom. So that one is going to reset our zoom back to 0. We can have this so that it zooms in only one step at a time. So now it's just going to zoom in one step every single time I press the button. So these are really cool. You can get really creative with them. You can do multi-actions where you can set up a whole bunch of, you can put a whole bunch of sets into one. You can put a whole bunch of adjusts into one. I've mainly just been using the sleep on and off. And I've also been using the compensation, and actually not with the adjust, but with the set. So I've been doing the set compensation, and I've been having the compensation, a 0 compensation, and then I've been having a like -1 compensation. These are going to look a little bit different than the app. So I believe 9 is considered 0 in the app, and then I would actually reduce it by a couple steps, as I mentioned, while I'm gaming, because the screen is so bright and it's kind of changing that up a little bit. So you have all these really cool options. Sleep is the one that I use by far a bunch, and you can get really creative with them, which is kind of nice. Another quick thing to note, when I moved the camera between computers, it brought all of the settings along with it. So all of the settings are stored directly on the camera and not on the computer itself. Makes it really easy if you do plan on using this across multiple devices and you want to have those settings kept no matter where you're plugging it into. So another really great use case for this webcam that I discovered after using it for a little while was using it to follow me around as a webcam for when I'm playing VR. You do have to change the tracking mode. I use the motion tracking instead of the standard tracking because it can't see my face and it seemed to struggle a little bit. But it did a really great job. I was just playing some Beat Saber on the easiest difficulty for this clip where I was recording here. But it follows me around pretty well. If I ended up moving too far out of frame or I ended up moving too quickly, sometimes it would lose me. But it is something that you could probably play around with and get working pretty well. I was pretty happy with it. It was able to follow me around really nicely. And it's nice to have a camera follow you around in VR, especially if you do have a very large space that you like playing VR in. Sometimes a camera is not going to be wide enough to follow that whole field of view, and having something that follows you around may be pretty nice. So now let's quickly talk about some pricing, and I'm going to talk about it at the regular price first of $180. I think this is where the camera really stands out from a lot of other options out there at the same price point, and really against other ones that have the same feature set. So $180 for 4K 30 HDR or 1080p 60 on a gimbal that has tons and tons of features in it. The software runs pretty well for the most part. I'm really happy about all the customization that you're able to do, all of the tuning that you're able to do with the camera, the fact that it has OSE, SDK, and Steam Deck integration as well, so that you're able to really control this camera with a bunch of different options depending on what you're using. I think it's great. Currently on their website, they have an 11% off discount. And with the upcoming Prime Big Deal days, they're doing up to 15% off. There will be links in the description to both their official website and Amazon, as well as some codes to help you get to the biggest discount that you can possibly get. Those will be down in the description as well as in the pinned comment, so go ahead and check those out. So now talking about the things that I like and the things that I don't like about the Tiny 2 Lite. And we'll start off with the things I don't like. It is a little bit disappointing that the virtual cam has pixelation issues. I have talked to the OBSBOT team. This may be something that they can fix with some software in the future, so hopefully that does happen. But we saw natively the camera, using the native camera, you can zoom in a 4x without any kind of quality issues. The camera looks really, really good, which is why I'm really disappointed that the virtual camera does have the quality problems, because the camera natively looks fantastic. So I really do hope they fix that. The only other thing that I'm a little bit disappointed in is the stand on the bottom not having the magnetic bottom like the Tiny 2 does. I like the fact that the Tiny 2 Lite has the integrated stand. I think that's great. I just wish it had the magnetic bottom like the Tiny 2. Being able to mount it anywhere, and especially if you want to use portrait mode, be able to mount it sideways to something just by tossing it onto a metal object, would have been really nice, and I would have liked that feature. I don't think it would have been too expensive. But other than those two negatives, I really don't have any others. Now, in terms of things that I do like, I really do like the amount of fine tuning and customization I'm able to do with the camera in the OBSBOT software. It does a very, very good job, and they are constantly updating that software as well. So hopefully it just continues to get better and better. I really like how much you can control the OBSBOT with other devices. So using my Stream Deck, for example, if I wanted to use SDK or OSC devices, I could use those as well. So having all of that control is really, really nice. And then finally, again, as we just mentioned previously, the pricing is really, really good for what you're getting out of this camera. I think at the standard price of $180 and then at the sale price of $160 or less, I think it's doing a really, really good job. I think this is a fantastic camera, and I would definitely recommend this thing to anybody who wants a more expensive but a more flexible camera for work, for streaming, for video content creation. I think it does a really good job for all of that, and you can see its use case in all of those situations and the flexibility that it gives you there. Just a quick reminder, if you do want to check out or buy the Tiny 2 Lite for yourself or for a friend, you can go ahead and check the description and the pinned comment. I will have links as well as the coupon codes to help you get the best possible deal, especially with the upcoming Prime Big Deal days. If you end up using either of those links, they do support the channel, and I really do appreciate it. Now, with all that said, I really do hope you found this video helpful, and if not, I at least hope you found it interesting. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you like, subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me or for OBSBOT, I'm sure they'll be reading them. You can leave those down in the comment section below, and I'll try to get to them all as quickly as I can. Big thanks to my patrons, and big thanks to you for watching the end of this video. If you do want to see any other product reviews, you can go ahead and check out the playlist right up here. And as always, stay safe out there. I'll see you next time.